I am Thuy Trần, the host of the series. On episode number 2, Professor Stefan Schaltegger will share with us about the Environmental Management Accounting EMA framework and potential for EMA application in practice. Professor Stefan Schaltegger is a full professor of sustainability management. He is head of the Center for Sustainability Management at the Leuphana University, Lüneburg, Germany, and the MBA Sustainability Management. Professor Schaltegger is listed among the world's top 2% most cited scientists in sustainability management, according to a recent ranking of Stanford University. He has published more than 500 articles and books. Also, he is a member of the editorial and advisory boards of 19 international scientific journals such as Accounting, Auditing and Accountability Journal, Sustainability, Accounting Management and Policy Journal, Journal of Accounting and Organizational Change, Business Strategy and Environment, Organization and Environment. Professor Schaltegger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Thuy, for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
I am honored to have you on the show. Let's talk about Environmental Management Accounting (EMA). In 2002, you and two co-authors, Professor Roger Barrett and Professor Tobias Hahn, published a paper towards a comprehensive framework for environmental management accounting, links between business actors and environmental management accounting tools. The paper has over 800 citations. That is incredible. In this paper, you categorize various tools along four dimensions, which can inform in management decision making. Can you share with us how you come up with the idea of developing this framework?
Thank you. Very interesting question. Well, the development of this framework has to be embedded in a whole storyline of developing research and dealing with tools of environmental management accounting. Based on my own PhD thesis and publications between 1990 and 1995, and based on critical analysis of Roger Barrett on the deficiencies of conventional accounting, Roger Barrett and I teamed up together and we published in the year 2000 the book Contemporary Environmental Accounting, which the idea of the book was to have a textbook on giving an overview of environmental accounting. In the meanwhile, this book has been cited, I think, more than 1,200 times. And Roger and I had therefore already developed environmental management accounting methods, and we've done a lot of research in that area. Tobias Hahn, he was a PhD student of mine and a researcher who I employed for a project of the United Nations. And the United Nations project dealt with environmental management accounting. And the UN, so-called Division for Sustainable Development at that time, which initiated this project, they installed an international working group to define and promote EMA. And the members of this group were so diverse and had such diverse views and interests and experiences that the understanding of what EMA was completely unclear. And they were so different. And they were also so different than what we had proposed in this book from the year 2000. And Roger and Tobias and I, we understood that the different members of this working group had very different views and motivations and interests. But we thought it's not helpful for promoting EMA to have all these different views and not have a clarity what is EMA actually. And so therefore we said, well, let's develop a framework that brings together these different perspectives and helps fostering EMA research and practice. So that was our goal. Then we realized that EMA may mean something different depending on what position and job and challenges you have in the company. And this may also be one of the reasons why these different working group members had different views, because they were all thinking from the perspective of a different actor in the company, or maybe also outside of the company. And by distinguishing these different decision situations which the different actors are confronted with, we realized that this could help to somehow bring structure and a system into the variety of those diverse tools that existed. And so we started distinguishing different decision situations according to time frame, monitoring physical measures, routine and ad hoc approaches, but also future and past orientation. And when we did that, we realized that while the variety of tools labeled with EMA was irritating at the beginning, actually this variety was good, because these different tools have different strengths and foci. And so our framework helps now decision makers to think clearly about the decision situation. You have to think of where are you positioned, where is your decision situation, and then it provides you what tool is helpful for your decision situation. So in other words, the framework helps to support an efficient identification of the most suitable tool for your decision situation, and then the most effective application of the tool. And it helps preventing that you apply the wrong tool for your decision situation. And therefore, it should also help to evade or prevent frustration from using EMA. These were all thoughts that developed and emerged in that process.
Can you give an example to illustrate how the framework is linked with business actors and decision making at a specific company?
Yes, well, we've published various case studies, for instance, one on Saigon beer, 2012 in the Journal of Cleaner Production, but also other examples. And there we describe also the specific decision situations. But let's take an easy example. For instance, if you're asked by the chief executive officer to evaluate whether it makes sense to invest into a photovoltaic installation on the roof of a production facility. Now, that's something that happens at the moment in the whole of Europe, I think in many places all over the world, that CEOs say, well, there's this technology, does it make to install that sense to install that? Then this is a one-time ad hoc decision situation. It's future oriented. It's a long-term decision. And you want to know whether it pays off, because that's what the CEO usually will imply when asking the question, does it make sense? So an environmental investment appraisal, that's the cell number 8 in this framework, that's then the adequate tool. And then you know this is what I can use in order to provide a good answer to the CEO. But when you do that, maybe in the same meeting, there will be a sustainability manager, and the sustainability manager will ask, well, does that make environmental sense? So what amount of CO2 emissions are reduced through that photovoltaic installation? And what you now need is physical information with regard to future long-term effects, and it's still a one-time decision. So therefore, physical environmental investment appraisal is needed. And that would then be cell number 16. You realize that, and you know what the tool is. And when I have now described you this as a process, this is actually something we have found in lots of case studies where we observed companies over a longer time period, that this is the way or the process how EMA is developed. You start with one decision situation, and then you develop a whole EMA system of the company by adding different tools. You know, there are other requests, or you realize that you need other kind of information, and therefore you start using and applying other tools. And this is something we analyzed, for instance, empirically in a 4-year project in Southeast Asia, so a couple of years after developing this framework. And this has been published in a book by Christian Herzig and us. And there, every company, you see that every company faces a different situation, other challenges, and therefore the EMA system in that company always looks specific, is different. And it is a kind of mosaic that interlinks these different tools that are developed then step by step. So it shows that a pragmatic development of an EMA system, as different decision situations occur, different demands and challenges come up, that this is something, well, this is how it happens in practice. And that's what we describe, actually also in a more recent paper in the Journal of Cleaner Production from 2019.
You have accompanied and influenced the development of environmental management accounting for more than 20 years. How do you evaluate the potential for EMA application in practice?
Also, that's a very nice and good question. Well, EMA is practice-oriented. All tools that are proposed in the framework can be applied in practice and have been applied somewhere in practice. So there's a large range of EMA tools that have been developed. However, some of these tools still rather have a research invention status, in the sense that they're good ideas, they're good examples. Some companies have applied them, but there are very few companies. So examples for such tools are eco-budgeting or long-term physical environmental planning. You find rare cases where this is applied. Other tools have been disseminated widely, most of all material flow cost accounting. Also invented in Germany, that tool was invented in Germany, particularly the Japanese initiatives have been influential in the dissemination. Now, what I observe is that other tools have started to gain importance now in more recent times, particularly investment-oriented tools, as many economies and public policies, governments are pressing businesses, and more businesses have started to invest more in renewable energy technologies. So these kind of tools are now on the upcoming. And one development that is covered by our EMA framework, but was not part of the original 2002 publication on the framework, is the focus on different types of environmental issues, such as greenhouse gases or material flows, energy, water, etc. And that's something we did then later. We analyzed applications for carbon emissions and water in subsequent publications. And I'm convinced that ever more companies will use EMA as the relevance of environmental issues. Well, just think of climate change and the discussions we have, Fridays for Future, etc. These environmental issues are becoming ever more important because the scarcity of environmental resources is increasing, and because the environmental problems are increasing in many countries. And EMA provides a useful, I would even say a necessary, an absolutely necessary basis for managers to support their decisions in that area. So I'm convinced that dissemination will increase, and not only for material flow cost accounting, but also for other tools. But we have a huge spectrum of application.
Recently, the topics of planetary boundaries and sustainable development goals have emerged in many studies. How do you see EMA being linked to planetary boundaries and sustainable development goals?
Well, yes, I have to admit, the links to the carrying capacity of the planet and planetary boundaries as a concept, as it has been proposed by the Stockholm Resilience Institute, by researchers like Rockström and his group, and Stefan and his group, etc. These planetary boundaries, that was for a long time not made explicit in EMA, in the EMA literature. So if you look at the EMA literature, the early ones, planetary boundaries, carrying capacities, that's all not addressed. There was an assumption behind EMA, and this assumption was that improving environmental performance with the help of EMA would invariably solve environmental problems. So there's no link to planetary boundaries needed. That was the assumption. But this is not necessarily true. For instance, on the organizational micro level, you might be proud and satisfied, for example, that you've achieved a reduction of 20% or even 50% of your greenhouse gas emissions. But when you think in terms of planetary boundaries, nowadays, to stay in the so-called safe operating space of these planetary boundaries mostly requires reductions of 80% up to 98%, depending on the industry. The plastics industry has to reduce, for instance, by 95%, according to these studies. It's therefore of key performance that you explicitly link EMA with planetary boundaries. And this is the reason why I addressed this in a recent paper with the title Linking Environmental Management Accounting, a reflection on missing links to sustainability and planetary boundaries in 2018 in the Social and Environmental Accounting Journal. And I think this is exactly the same issue with regard to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Also here, we have clear reference points which did not exist in 2002. There were the Millennium Goals, but not the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, obviously. And as ever more companies are using UN SDGs as reference points, it makes sense to link EMA very clearly with the UN SDGs. This has been addressed by a recent paper of Jan Bebbington and Jeff Unerman, 2018, in Accounting, Auditing, and Accountability Journal, with the title Achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, an enabling role for accounting research. So there's research in this area going on, but the practice still has to develop.
As far as I know, you were the chairman of the Global Environmental and Sustainability Management Accounting Network, EMAN, for 20 years. Could you please share with us more about this network?
Yes. EMAN is a global network. It's organized into 4 sections: a European section, an Asia Pacific section, an African section, and an Americas section. And it's a loose network that organizes annual conferences, edited books, and special issues of journals. And the idea is to support researchers and practitioners who develop and disseminate EMA and sustainability management accounting. The European section was the first one from where it started, and it's probably also still the most active one, together with the Asia Pacific section. All sections have their regional activities and conferences. EMAN takes a very pragmatic perspective. It's solution-oriented. That's what characterizes this network compared to other networks which are more research, or maybe let's also say ivory tower oriented. EMAN tries to link research with practice. And the idea is that it makes sense to meet to talk about EMA in order to contribute to better EMA tools and methods and to more applications. So EMAN is clearly not an ivory tower, but it takes a more so-called transdisciplinary perspective, which means that practice and research is interlinked much more strongly. There are no costs, no fees. You can register. You will not get a lot of mails, only very few little information about the conferences and the special issues, etc. So it's a loose network. But that was the idea right from the beginning. And I think over time, we have seen that the topics have developed. We have new and other topics. And we also see that the ambition with regards to what environmental management accounting should achieve has increased substantially.
Next, I would like to ask you 2 questions about educating environmental management accounting for students who are next generations to work in practical corporations. Do you think that universities should integrate environmental management accounting into the accounting curriculum? Do you have any recommendations for educating students about environmental management accounting effectively at universities?
Yeah, oh, very important question you're addressing to probably the audience and me, being in the educational sector. Yes, I'm definitely, EMA should be a constitutional part of every accounting curriculum. I'm very clear about that. Accounting curricula that do not include EMA are outdated, in my view. I mean, if you ignore that, you're absolutely outdated. Every bachelor curriculum in accounting should provide an introduction to EMA and should also have a course on material flow cost accounting. The exciting side of EMA is first that a lot of case studies exist, particularly for material flow cost accounting, from which you can learn. And this is particularly helpful for bachelor programs. And second, EMA is so diverse that you can find, well, the standard approaches that are well developed, like material flow cost accounting, but you can also, and they of course help you to find a job, a future job, for instance, in production, etc. But EMA also entails a lot of questions and raises a lot of questions and discusses a lot of methods which are very specific and that can challenge you intellectually, like for instance environmental planning for biodiversity impacts of a company. Dealing with such less developed EMA tools may be most interesting for master programs or also for PhD students and research. EMA for biodiversity approaches still needs to be developed much further. It could, for instance, mean something completely different whether you address diversity of species or diversity of ecosystems or genetic diversity. And I think already this challenges you then to ask yourself, well, what is actually managing biodiversity? And then what kind of information do you need? And what kind of information could be useful in order to support decision makings to improve with regards to the biodiversity? So I see a huge spectrum for bachelor and master programs and also for the research area. And for bachelor programs in accounting, absolutely mandatory.
Before ending this episode, I would like to ask you the last question. In 2021, you published a book chapter, namely Materials and Energy Accounting, in the Handbook of Environmental Accounting. What is new in this chapter you wanted to inspire readers?
Well, the idea of this chapter is to provide a contemporary overview of EMA with regard to materials and energy flows. It's not a usual research paper, but it's rather an overview chapter that aims to provide a short introduction into the topic. But we address a couple of issues which might be considered rather recent or new. For instance, compared to earlier overview papers, we state that a better link to creating different types of business cases is needed. So at the moment, this is not discussed in much depth. How does EMA contribute to creating a specific type of business case? And we also emphasize the relevance of managing environmental impacts beyond organizational boundaries, which is something which was not emphasized like that at the beginning when the framework was developed. And this is not limited to supply chains or the use and disposal of products, for instance, along the value chain, but this also includes planetary boundaries and how the company contributes to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's definitely not the United States, but the United Nations SDGs. And one thing which we also highlight is the need to extend EMA towards sustainability management accounting in order to consider social issues like modern slavery, which have become very important more recently, or at least awareness has increased with regard to modern slavery. And so what we say is there is still a lot of room for research, particularly with regard to managing information on social impacts of companies and to link that with the environmental information. So we address a couple of more recent and newer fields, but the idea is not that this would be a research paper, but this would be an overview paper.
Many thanks for joining us today, Professor Schaltegger. I'm really inspired by our conversation.
Well, thank you very much for the very interesting questions and for the discussion. And for everybody who is listening to or has listened to this podcast, I hope that you find this area interesting and of relevance. I'm convinced that there are a lot of job opportunities in this area, and that for many positions which are not labeled with accounting or reporting, still knowledge about environmental management accounting can be very helpful in order to take improved decisions, better decisions that help us to achieve hopefully more sustainable economy and society in the future.
Thank you again, Professor Schaltegger.